Hi, I'm Katie Mastel, Government Affairs and Advocacy Manager here at the Chamber, joined by my colleague Mason Rademacher, Public Policy and Workforce Development Coordinator. And today we are pleased to be joined by Minnesota Representative Paul Marquardt, who serves as the Chairman of the Minnesota Tax Committee and as a member of the Education, Finance, Property and Local Tax, and the Ways and Means Committees. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And Mason, I'll turn it over to you to ask the first question.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you, Representative Marquardt, for joining us this afternoon. Focusing first on police reform, the major accomplishment of the second special session now was the passage of an extensive police reform bill. Included in it was the creation of a new unit to investigate police deadly force incidents, the banning of police chokeholds and warrior-style training, as well as the creation of a new system of arbitration to weigh police deadly force encounters. Could you please explain in a little bit more depth what each of these changes entail and what impacts are expected to have for the state of Minnesota?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invite. Nice to be with you, Katie and Mason. And it's not like, nothing's going on these days. Just same old. Yes, absolutely. But getting back to that, of course, the George Floyd incident was inhumane. It was atrocious. It was just, unfathomable. And thank goodness the 4 officers there were fired and then charged also. So that led to the police reform movement. And my big concern was when we moved towards that is that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all and just something that we're going to try to correct what's happening in Minneapolis, and that's going to affect everyone elsewhere. And that's one thing I was really looking out for. And what happened in the end was a good compromise, I think, and passed pretty strong bipartisan in the House 102-29 and in the Senate 60-7. So it's pretty unanimous. And so there was a police reform bill that had passed a couple weeks before on the House floor, and I had voted against that bill. And here's why. So let's kind of start with the things I was trying to avoid, and as I've talked to, and I talk to law enforcement a lot in this area, is number one of the things that was in the original bill is that all police-related deaths would be prosecuted through the Attorney General's office. And there's just no way that we're going to take rural Minnesota cases and have them prosecuted through a lens of the Twin Cities. And so that was just a non-starter. Another one dealt with deadly force, Statute 609. And basically, they were looking to change that. And my concern with that is that when an officer gets into a situation where they believe there is a chance of death to them or someone else, or substantial bodily harm to them or somebody else, they can use deadly force. What I was very worried about that legislation and the wording was that it would cause these police officers to think, can I do this or not? And just a split second of delay in an officer in that type of a situation not using deadly force if they need to could cost them their lives or somebody else's. So that was in the bill originally that I could not support. And the third thing was where a person, they would take away the statute of limitation on civil lawsuits against police officers and cities and counties regarding police-related deaths. And that just was something you could go back, 40, 50, 60 years. So all 3 of those things that were in the one bill I opposed were not in the bill that did pass. So those 3 main things were not in there. And so what was in the bill that I think was a good compromise, I actually think will strengthen law enforcement in the area. And anything you do also to increase public confidence helps police officers too, just because of the dynamics of them working in the communities. But what this will do, it sets up a lot of training. Training dealing with conflict resolution, crisis intervention, mental health, autism, all those which I think is very good. It also increased $6 million a year for the next couple years with this training, which I think will be beneficial. It also outlawed chokeholds. Unless the officer or someone else is in danger of death, then they can use it as kind of a last resort, but otherwise outlawed that. It requires an officer to intervene in a situation. So like the George Floyd situation, the officers, the other ones were afraid to intervene just because of the kind of the rank and so forth. This would require them to do so. There's peer counseling. There's some database work on looking at incidences when force is used and so forth. There's incentives to get officers to live in the city or the county in which they work. Right now, cities and counties are prohibited from doing that, and that was kind of a compromise. The one would have allowed them if they wanted. This says this would create incentives. Cities and counties can create incentives if they want, saying if you're a Moorhead police officer, we can give you an extra amount of money if you live in Moorhead. And that is not such a problem in this neck of the woods, because people, smaller towns, we know our officers, but in Minneapolis, St. Paul, it's just they don't have that repertoire. So overall, I think it's going to strengthen the work of our police officers in making our community safer, and the extra training, I think, is going to be good.
So some legislators feel that the police reform package didn't go far enough, and they believe that it's only a start and there's more that needs to be done for criminal justice and police accountability measures. So where do you kind of stand on this bill as far as, do you think it went far enough? If not, what else should be done?
I think it went far enough. I really do, because some of the advocates want to include those things that I'm strongly opposed to, and I think most people in rural Minnesota would be opposed to. The one thing we didn't want to do is say that these few bad apples in Minneapolis reflected the great work that our law enforcement do here in the area. And that's why I thought the compromise bill did not do that. It dealt with things overall that I think will improve the law enforcement, their ability to do their job. So that's what I'm worried about, is when you add some of these things, it's getting too punitive and it's dealing more with the Minneapolis situation than the rest of the state. So I think, when you can get both sides kind of started from scratch to send the House, and the House was way up here with reforms, and the Senate was, and they came to a good compromise. And that's, you have the Republican Senate, Democratic House, they came to a compromise. I think we got a good middle ground that I think, again, is going to make law enforcement stronger.
So shifting topics a little bit now, state of Minnesota, we just concluded our second special session. Are we going to see a third?
Well, maybe 3 times the charm.
Right,
so,
right.
The big thing there that I've been working on was the Section 179 that we've talked about, and you guys have been strong supporters of that. And so just a little detail on what we finally worked out, because once the COVID-19 hit, we went from a budget surplus to a budget deficit of about $2.5 billion. And so what we did is, one of the things that we talked about at a meeting right here in this room back a half a year ago or so was the federal government now recognizing the gain on a like-kind exchange. When you trade something in, you've got to now recognize that trade-in value. Well, on the federal level, that's okay, because they did the full Section 179, so by being able to expense everything on the first year, it offset that cost. But in Minnesota, we still had just about 20%. You still had to add back 80%. So what we had is farmers and small businesses who in 18 and 19 thought they were doing the right thing, all of a sudden going retroactive, they get this big Minnesota state tax bill, because the recognition on the personal property and like-kind exchange is higher than the depreciation on the Section 179. So what we did to cut costs and still get to the core of the problem, so what we did is we said, okay, in tax years 2018 and 2019, on all of those like-kind exchanges, we will apply the full Section 179 expensing. Just on those going retroactive, not anything else, those like-kind. So now on a like-kind exchange, they're getting the same treatment as they would under the federal government. So that solves that problem. Then moving forward, tax year 2020 and beyond, it would be full Section 179 expensing on everything. That took the cost from about $200 million down to $90 million. So it became, so that's what was agreed upon between the House and the Senate. And I think most people are, I've talked to the farm groups and I think the statewide chamber's fine with that approach. And it being in a deficit, it made it a lot more attractive. So that was the agreement. And so we got it there in that last special session. We had the Republican Senate and the Democratic House and the governor all on board. We put it in as part of the bonding bill because at the beginning of the year, and I think we've talked about this before, we always knew it would be a bonding bill for the House in exchange for a tax bill for the Senate.
Yep.
And it's tough to do one or the other because if one passes and one doesn't, then one part of the agreement is. So we put them together. And so it takes 60% of the vote because there's bonding in it. So it took, in the House, it took 81 votes instead of 68. So we could not get to the 81 votes, couldn't get the minority party in the House on board, and so we weren't able to get that through. But it was disappointing because this was the first time in 20 years that I've been in the legislature that we had the House and the Senate and the governor all agreeing on the Section 179 as the final agreement. I mean, we've had separate bills where it's all, but as a final agreement, it's never made the final cut. This was the first time. And so on the House floor, when I was speaking to the bill, I said, we've got to come back in August again because the governor, if he wants to extend his emergency powers, has to come back to the legislature. So we're going to get another shot, but there's no guarantees that same dynamic is going to exist where you've got all we have to do is vote yes on this bill today, and we've got it. I mean, I remember my first year in the legislature, 2001, getting emails on Section 179. I didn't know what the heck the person was talking about, seriously. So I had to find that out. But so I've been getting emails and contacts from people for 20 years on fully conforming to Section 179. And so we had a chance to do it and couldn't quite push it across the goal line. But like I said, maybe 3 times the charm.
So August, special session number 3, Section 179.
Yeah.
And then do you want to talk a little bit about a bonding bill as well?
Yeah. I mean, and those two have to go together because that's the agreement between the House and the Senate. And there's nothing, we do that all. People talk about the single subject rule. That's gone, you only say that when you need another bullet point to go against the bill. It doesn't really mean all that much, quite frankly. But yeah, we need that bonding bill. I mean, we were able to get $1.35 billion in general obligation bonds, and then about another $400 million in highway GO bonds, and then another $100 million and some on appropriation bonds. So it's a $1.85 billion. Who would have thought? Seriously, where again you got a Republican Senate, a Democratic House, and a governor all agreeing to this. And so, I mean, it's things that, and one of the things that we're doing, even with this 1.85, we're actually doing a lot of work that was in a previous bill. So we're not even moving ahead. We're kind of getting projects that have kind of back a couple years ago. And so, I mean, it puts people to work. Interest rates are low. Contractors are hungry. Bids have been coming in good on other projects. In this area, Moorhead, as part of that would be this 11th Street grade separation. I think they had $110 million in grade separation in that bill, and that Moorhead 11th Street is number 1 on the MnDOT priority list, like $62 million. You had the Clay County Transfer Solid Waste Station, the Moorhead Armory. I'm missing something. And then, in the Detroit Lakes area, it had the Heartland Trail and the Becker County Museum. So the Weld Hall was not in there. That at one time was in there, but I'm missing one. Oh, and then there's flood mitigation. Not specific, but Moorhead's on that list, but there's money for flood mitigation to kind of finish up this last stretch in Moorhead. So a lot of really good projects. I just don't know what it's going to look like. Yeah. I've talked to my leadership, and that's still my priorities. Is I think we need a bonding bill in Section 179.
So are you seeing that as kind of the final wrap up, the final piece of what needs to be passed before we go into November 3rd election?
Yes, I mean the police reform was a big deal. We weren't going to get anything else until that happened. That's done. And so, yes, that's going to be the big priority. If they decide, I mean, they could decide and go back and say we're going to vote on the governor's emergency powers extension and go home. I hope not. But certainly August will be absolutely the last time, because now you're within 2 months, 3 months of the election, and it's just tough to get work done in that atmosphere.
Yeah. So yeah, bringing up the emergency proclamation, I mean, there's been a lot of debate regarding Governor Walz's extension of the peacetime emergency proclamation. Would you support another extension?
I have voted against the ones in June and July. And I actually once during the regular session. So I've actually opposed it 3 times. And it's no way is this a criticism of Governor Walz. What he did early on, we were in an emergency situation. We had to build up capacity for our ICU beds, our personal protection equipment, ventilators, testing. We're now prepared. We've hit, kind of all of those marks. And in my mind, we're not in an emergency situation anymore. And I really think that the legislature needs to take more on right now. And a lot of people say, well, the legislature can't react quick enough and they can't. Well, all right, then the blame's on us if we can't. If there's things that need to be done and we can't agree to it and get it done, then, that falls on all of us. But I think we're in a situation right now where we are, the legislature has to have more input. And we're not in an emergency situation.
So you talked a little bit about how the budget forecast has completely turned upside down. As we start to look at the next biennium, and obviously that's past the November election, but as we look past that a little bit, is the state of Minnesota going to have to look at whether it's increasing taxes, developing new tax revenue opportunities? Kind of as you look forward and forecast a little bit, what do you think that the next session is going to look like for that?
I think everything has to be on the table. I really do. And you mentioned revenue increases, but I also think we've got to look at where we can make cuts and efficiencies. Okay. We've got $2.4 billion in reserves. You don't like using those one-time funding because it doesn't solve the structural balance in the future. But that's why we have it, to buy us some time. I think the economy is going to come back. It's not going to be maybe as strong as the early projections, but things might actually get better in a couple years than what's projected for this biennium. There's also some things we've done in the past where we have delayed school funding. That we don't reduce it, we just pay them later. It's a budget year shift. And back in the 2011, we had like a 60-40 where we'd pay them 60 and then 40. Right now it's 90-10. There's always a bit of delay just to make sure the students count. But right now for every percent, you get $100 million. So let's say you went to an 80-20, which schools, they would handle that great. It's like I said, that'd be $1 billion of that 2.4 right there. Now, you've got to pay it back ultimately but what it would do is buy us some time to see in the future how that budget is going to do. So that's why I don't think we should overreact in any direction, because we've got some cushion there to see what is going to be the direction of the budget. So my first deals would be to look at the budget reserve, look at doing some of this budget shifting. And again, it's terrible accounting practice, but we've done it time and time again. It'll buy us some time. And then we can look at those other areas of either revenue increases and or expenditure cuts. But I think everything has to be on the table. But I'd go to those approaches of the reserve and the shifting first.
Well, we'll keep our eye on for the next special session and then the regular session after that.
Right.
Thank you so much for joining us today, though. Representative Marquardt, we appreciate your time today, and we really appreciate all that you do for our community and the relationship that you have with the Chamber. So thank you.
Well, Katie, Mason, thank you, because I really appreciate FM's Chamber approach, because the last 3 to 5 years, you've really put an emphasis on a lot of the Minnesota things and what's happening over there. And I really appreciate that. So forums like this is really good, and I just appreciate the information I get during the session, and where you're saying, hey, could you look at this? We'd like this. That is really helpful in this forum when you brought folks together here a while back in the farm industry and small businesses. That was really helpful. So thanks for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.